Good morning, Liberty. It is Wednesday morning, March 6th, 2019. My name is Michael Bolden, broadcasting live through the 10thAmendmentCenter.com YouTube channel. It's 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here on the West Coast, here in my home office and studio. So good morning to you, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be tuning in, whether it's live or in the archive. I'm very grateful for you spending a little time with me today. On this episode, this is one of the few episodes I've actually had to do an outline for myself. I spent a little bit of time the other night on Monday night and early this morning doing some just kind of organizing, because there's so much information that it's easy to get lost in the rabbit hole of NSA surveillance. Now, of course, they don't use the term surveillance, but we can. It's bulk warrantless surveillance of people that they shouldn't be doing, violation of the Constitution, and they've been doing it for a long time. But there's been reports, which started in the New York Times, actually with Marcy Wheeler, and then in the New York Times, saying that a controversial NSA surveillance program has been shut down. And this has been repeated all over the place. In fact, in general, what I'm seeing when I'm looking at this is that most of the media coverage, even the good guy media coverage in general, like some of the alternative media, they've basically been saying, oh, a surveillance program, they're just not using it. Maybe they're on the side of maybe Trump doesn't want to use it, or on some other people are saying Trump because he doesn't want to have the program because it's bad. And then other people say, oh, Trump doesn't want to use it because he's concerned about the Russiagate thing. But no one's really pointing out that, I guess in the short version, is that the program that's not being used, which is different than being shut down, the program that's not being used is really only a sliver, a piece of the dragnet that makes up the entire dragnet. So today I'm going to talk about specifically what was said, who said it, and then also a bigger picture of the other programs beyond the Section 215 program, or the USA Freedom Act program that's being referenced in all the news reports. That is FISA 702, which was just reauthorized through 2023 in 2017. And then also something that most people don't even know about, which is 12333, Executive Order 12333, which is back from the Reagan administration, which we'll see is a vast majority of the so-called surveillance authority from the NSA. Before doing that, I do want to say hi to my friends out in the live chat. I really appreciate everyone who joins me live, who's able to do so here on YouTube. It makes it a lot of fun for me to be able to engage with people, get ideas, see the conversations and debates. Hi to Justin Bayola, EHP Training. Tyler Idemon says, Bolden, good to see you, man. Ward Lawrence, and of course, my buddy Alan Mosley with the Gold Standard Podcast. I appreciate you guys being here. And whether you're able to make it live or not, I appreciate the comments. I appreciate all the feedback over at team at 10thAmendmentCenter.com. All the people, we had a bunch of people sign up as members recently after the show that I did last week on gun rights, and I think that's pretty awesome. So thank you so much. So if you do support our effort, don't feel obligated to become a member. You can over at 10thAmendmentCenter.com/members for as little as $2 a month. Don't feel obligated, but I am very grateful for that. If that is not an option for you, or if it is, the other thing that you can do, which is absolutely free, is smash the like button, no matter what platform you're on. Leave comments, and of course, share the link to this show as widely as possible. Leave reviews on the iTunes podcast as well, and that's very important. So all that stuff triggers the algorithm, triggers the platform. They're all very easily triggered to share the information with more people. So thank you very much for that and listening to my little self-promotion here. But let's get right to it. I want to talk about what's going on with the NSA. I have no idea how long this is going to take. We might run long, we might go short, but we'll see. There's a lot of info, and I'm only going to scratch the surface with you on this. But just basically trying to weave a story and take you down a path where you can go a little bit further. I've included a ton of links, I mean, way more than normal, in the show notes here on YouTube. And then, of course, we also put all of our show notes and all of our archives and all the links to where you can subscribe over at 10thAmendmentCenter.com/Good Morning Liberty. So let's hit it. First, the bombshell report from the New York Times. Disputed NSA phone program is shut down, aide says. And this is from Charlie Savage, who, love or hate the New York Times, Savage has done some very good reporting on the NSA over the years. So Here's how he starts. The National Security Agency has quietly shut down a system that analyzes logs of Americans' domestic calls and texts, according to a senior Republican congressional aide, halting a program that has touched off disputes about privacy and the rule of law since the September 11th attacks. The agency has not used the system in months, Charlie continues, and the Trump administration might not ask Congress to renew its legal authority, which, and I'm letting you know here, it expires at the end of the year, this year, end of 2019. It expires, and there's a debate over whether or not to renew. Of course, you shouldn't renew it. Congress shouldn't. Whether they will or not is another story. They did renew another section 702, in 2017 for 6 years, as I mentioned, and I'll get into that in more detail shortly. So the report continues. The Trump administration might not ask Congress to renew its legal authority, which is set to expire at the end of the year, according to the aide, Luke Murray, the House Minority Leader's national security advisor. This is an insider that works directly on national security issues. So I wouldn't necessarily blow off the fact that it's just from an aide. It's not just from any old aide. This is a national security advisor who is involved in the details. So what this person is saying is a big deal, but it also is a big deal to understand what's really being said here. So I highlighted some sections here. You can read through it if you want as you go through it, through the details of this report on the New York Times. You generally should have free access. If not, I'll just kind of leave it up here, the highlighted section, so if you're watching the video, you can see it. But here's what Mr. Murray said. He brought up they were in a podcast at Lawfare, which is very much pro-national security state, pro-executive authority, pro-foreign intervention. Lawfare is generally the bad guys, but it's interesting to note what they're talking about. So Murray is in this interview on their podcast, and they were talking about the pending expiration of the USA Freedom Act, but then disclosed that the Trump administration, quote, hasn't actually been using it for the past 6 months. Again, that is really the key here. The USA Freedom Act, which was intended to replace what was the original authority or put limits on the original authority of Section 215 of the Patriot Act, hasn't been used. Specifically, the USA Freedom Act, which is up for extension or renewal at the end of 2019, hasn't been used in the past 6 months. And he says, I'm actually not certain that the administration will want to start that back up. Very specific statement there. Now, keep in mind, when I'm talking about specific statements from the NSA, they are done on purpose. These spokesmen aren't, they're not screwing up. They're not saying things one way or another by accident. When they say they haven't been using the Freedom Act for the past 6 months, they mean they haven't been using that for the past 6 months. In fact, they even have something called an intelligence law handbook. And here's from a report at the ACLU a while back about some of the documents released about the NSA surveillance program. And it says the documents openly acknowledge the word games that the government plays when describing its surveillance. So we have to understand, we have to always take with a grain of salt something that sounds good coming from the government regarding surveillance. Like, oh, we're going to shut down this program. This program is not being used. They may not want to start this program. That program was stopped 6 months ago. You have to really, really take that with a grain of salt. That does not imply, and I'm just jumping ahead a little bit, that does not imply, of course, that all surveillance has been shut down. Like, I think a lot of people are getting the impression like this is a huge victory and no longer is the NSA spying on Americans' text and phone records. Now, mind you, that is just phone records. This is just the phone records collection. It's not necessarily talking about just general internet traffic. That's under a different program. So they go on. They say, two of my colleagues have previously highlighted the NSA's, quote, vocabulary of misdirection, a language that allows it to say one thing while meaning quite another. And one of the slippery slopes that the NSA uses is the seemingly straightforward term collect, which the NSA has redefined to let it simultaneously acquire huge amounts of data while denying that it's collecting anything at all. And this comes from the Intelligence Law Handbook from the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. They acknowledge the misdirection, and they tell agents to adjust their surveillance vocabulary. So when someone is talking about collection, oh, we don't collect, we're not doing surveillance, they've actually got their own internal definitions of what those terms mean. So when you hear that, you may think in the normal term, oh, this program has been shut down, so therefore they're not doing it anymore. They're not collecting, they're not doing surveillance, and they're coming out and saying it under oath. So they're not going to lie. But we have to be careful of that. And that's what Bruce Schneier, who is one of the top cryptographers out there, this is what he said in a blog a while back on his website. Be careful when someone from the intelligence community uses the caveat, quote, not under this program, or, quote, not under this authority. Almost certainly it means that whatever it is they're denying is done under let me repeat that because this is important. So we're being careful with the caveat that they're not doing it under this program. They stopped that program. They stopped using USA Freedom Act 6 months ago. So we're keeping that in mind in relation to what just happened on Monday, or what was released on Monday. And Bruce goes on, he says, it almost certainly means that whatever it is they're denying is done under some other program or authority. So when D said that companies knew about NSA collection under Section 702, it doesn't mean they knew about the other collection programs. So when they're saying, and in fact, wasn't it Clapper who supposedly lied to it's possible that Clapper lied to Congress. I think Clapper was a liar, as a criminal. But he denied something very specific, I think. In a way, he denied, I believe, surveillance under Section 215, while now just this week there was another video of him that Edward Snowden tweeted out talking about how he's like, oh, well, you know, the question was confusing. They were asking him about something specific, maybe, and he was denying that. But of course, what they were really doing was under a different authority, and I think it was Section 702, which is something that I'll cover here briefly. So again, when they say it's not being done under this program or this authority, or this program is not being used, do not assume that they're not doing whatever that program supposedly authorized at all. Let's go back to that statement from Mr. Murray. He said that because the Freedom Act is expiring this year and they're talking about renewal or not, well, the Trump administration, quote, hasn't actually been using it for the past 6 months. He doesn't say that they haven't been doing mass surveillance domestically for the last 6 months. He just says that they haven't been using the USA Freedom Act. It's very specific. Very specific. And I do want to point out, again, Marcy Wheeler at emptywheel.net. This is probably the top researcher and reporter on this. You're going to get all the best info. You may not love everything else that she blogs about, but when it comes to NSA surveillance, there are very few people that are as good as her. And here's a blog from back in 2014 when she's covering the review group, Richard Clark, who was a big deal in security up until I think 2003 or so. And they were recommending changes, for example. And he said specifically, public attention is focused on 215. That's the PATRIOT Act, the supposedly only thing that they're using to surveil or collect data. Or they would say that they're not even collecting. The Slate article I linked, they actually give you, oh, I didn't actually include that. Here's one that I forgot. There's an article in Slate that links from this ACLU post, this previously highlighted link. They actually talk about how the word collect means something else. So if an intelligence official says that the NSA isn't, quote, collecting a certain kind of information, what has he actually said? Not very much, it turns out. One of the NSA's foundational documents states that collection occurs not when the government acquires the information, but when the government selects or tasks that information for subsequent processing. So they're collecting everything, but they're claiming it doesn't count as collection because under their definition, collection only means collection plus. they're using it for, it's been selected for additional processing, but they have access to it whenever they want. So they've collected it, but they don't call it collection. This is very dystopian and Orwellian. So here's what Clark said. He said, public attention is focused on 215, but 215, again, Patriot Act Section 215, produces a small percentage of the overall data that's collected. A small percentage comes from the Patriot Act. You know, in my work and in my strategic approach on everything to undermine, nullify, reject, resist, stop all unconstitutional action, whether it's surveillance or anything else, I am happy when a small percentage is stopped, especially when it's such a huge violation of rights. I guess it would be for small ones too, as long as you don't want to just stop at the small change. But if public attention is focused on Section 215, it's possible. Did Mr. Clark give us some inside info by accident? Did he do it on purpose? Was he actually trying to be helpful? I don't know. But in this one line, he's saying, look, this is just a small piece of the puzzle. And public attention is focused primarily on the small piece of the puzzle rather than the big thing, the elephant in the room, the 800-pound gorilla. What is the phrase? And Marcy goes on. She says, that's consistent with what another post shows, that U.S.-based metadata collection is just a small fraction of a large collection of metadata, and the 12333 collected data is at least partly duplicative of, but not subject to the same protections as, the Section 215, Dragnet, and national security letters. That's a lot to digest. They have three main authorities, probably more, others that we're not aware of, that they use for their legal justification behind the scenes. Section 215, Section 702, 12333. A lot of times the information that they collect is totally the same. There's overlap. So let's say you have Section 215 collected, and then I'm trying to do one of these graphs where there's circles and you show an overlap. I'm trying to do that with my hands and failing, but hopefully that makes sense to you guys who are watching and paying attention. So, and I'm sorry for not really looking into the chat and engaging with the comments. I'm mostly skipping that. I'll probably just kind of do a quick look near the end, but I want to go through all this information just straight through. And I see there's a lot of engagement going on back there, and I really appreciate it. I'll point out, I've not seen Ernest from AEC Radio, welcome to the show, who says the Patriot Act is a treasonous document. Absolutely. Now, mind you, again, I think the important part, the reason I wanted to mention that after being quickly distracted or just briefly distracted, is that the Patriot Act, really, we're all focusing, and I spent a lot of years focusing on Patriot Act. The early part of my work when the 10th Amendment was started in 2006 was heavily focused on that, the Real ID Act, marijuana prohibition, unconstitutional foreign wars. These are some of the main drives behind what got me started. And this is, at least in the early handful of years, but this is only a small fraction. And that's extremely important to know and keep in mind. So let's look at one of the other ones. Here's from Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF.org. And we're talking about Section 702. This is just a quick overview so you guys know what else they're doing. In general, Section 215 is the collection of phone data, calls, texts, and that's pretty much it. Section 702 is primarily internet traffic. They're tapping into the backbone of the internet and having access to it. They're not collecting that, of course, under their term. And they're doing that on U.S. only and international backbone of the internet. So wherever the internet is going, Section 702 basically sweeps that up. And here's how EFF describes it. First passed in 2008 as part of the FISA Amendments Act, and reauthorized last week when this was written until 2023. Section 702 is the primary legal authority that the NSA uses to conduct warrantless electronic surveillance against non-U.S. targets. Targets is a term of art, of course, has got a specific definition, located outside the U.S. The two publicly known programs, mind you, I like that EFF says this, the two publicly known programs operated under Section 702 are Upstream and Downstream. Downstream, I believe, was the one that was formerly known as PRISM. They go on. Section 702 differs from other foreign surveillance laws because the government can pick targets and conduct surveillance without a warrant signed by a judge. So once a year, they present to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, FISC. They give them a plan of how they want to do things once a year. They say, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to tap into. This is what we have access to. And you just sign off on this once a year. They never need a warrant ever because supposedly it's only for foreign targets. And people who believe that foreign human beings don't have rights and the federal government is not restricted in its activity based on the Constitution, regardless of who they're engaging with, that has actually opened up a huge Pandora's box because, okay, now they don't even have to even get a rubber stamp warrant. They just have a process and procedure manual that they submit to these people, and they get a once-a-year approval. So this is the general overview of Section 702. That is the tapping in to the backbone of the internet. And so there's the upstream and downstream version. I've already switched to another link here, and I think I should zoom out because it's not coming in fully. There we go. Let's see if I can I bring this in? Well, hopefully you guys can see it if you're watching here. It's cutting up right to the edge. I got to figure out I'll do a little practice of this for those of you who are watching. My highlights seem to be going off the page a little bit with EFF. But here's what they say. In downstream surveillance, U.S. intelligence agencies go directly to companies like Google, Facebook, and Yahoo and force the companies to turn over communications to and from identified selectors, including communications between targets and Americans. The companies are then prohibited from telling their users that their data has been turned over to the government. That's downstream. Upstream, the NSA partners like AT&T tap into the high-capacity fiber optic cables that carry internet traffic and carry all the data flowing through those cables. In a way, and I don't know, this is just my own thoughts on this as I review this stuff that I've looked at for so many years now. Most of us who make a phone call, we're not really going over the air anymore. Some of the NSA facilities, like the listening post in Yakima, Washington, are big satellites to collect satellite or phone, over-the-air phone from foreign agents. They would have these old school. I mean, I guess they still work like that now. But so much of our communication, even our phone records, are VoIP. Voice over IP. So our phone records, in probably most situations, maybe someone out there, Idemon, I don't know, maybe you know, most of our communication, even if we're making a phone call or sending a text, is really going over the internet. So I guess it depends on how technology is advanced. So maybe if the USA Freedom Act was stopped, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's irrelevant. So that's an important piece to know as well. And here's how the Brennan Center, which is another good organization on this, they say Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, the law was passed in 2008 to legalize George W. Bush's warrantless wiretapping program. And that, a brief aside there, is that in general, when we find out about something, it's because it's already been happening for a long time. So what they supposedly aren't doing now, or what we aren't even conceiving of maybe in 5 or 10 or 20 or 50 years, we're going to find out that they're doing something much broader. So they were already doing the mass surveillance, and so therefore then they got Section 702 passed to legalize what they've already been doing in the first place. We know the automated license plate reader program that I've covered on this show so many times, the surveillance based on pictures of your license plate. The DEA had been conducting that surveillance program for 8 years before they ever even talked about it, and it was uncovered through some kind of a leak. The Stingray surveillance, these kind of handheld electronic devices that spoof cell phone towers that are handed out by the FBI or the Department of Justice to local law enforcement so they can collect granular level of surveillance and then pass it around through fusion centers and information sharing environment to everybody. Now, that information, those were usually handed out of the grants for them along with a non-disclosure agreement because they wanted to keep it secret. So we don't know what they're necessarily doing. So the Brennan Center points out that although the target must be a foreigner overseas, Section 702 surveillance is believed to result in the incidental collection of millions of Americans' communications. Now, again, we don't know for sure. We don't know for sure, but the experts who've researched this are telling us that we're getting little breadcrumbs and little pieces get leaked out, and you basically have to follow this rabbit hole to understand what's going on. And incidental collection is a big part of this. EFF has a whole section on incidental collection. They say calling something incidental makes it sound unplanned, but don't be fooled. The NSA's wireless collection of Americans' communications is anything but unintended or unpredicted. Under the law, they write, the U.S. government can't identify Americans as foreign intelligence targets, meaning they can't use Section 702 surveillance with the goal of collecting specific Americans' communications. The government is also not supposed to collect purely domestic communications between Americans who are located in the U.S. But the government can and does collect communications of Americans who happen to communicate with targeted individuals abroad. And we have to keep that in mind. I'm going to show you guys an example of how this plays out near the end of the show here. The intelligence community calls this incidental collection to downplay the fact that it routinely uses this broad and privacy-invasive foreign intelligence surveillance authority to collect Americans' communications that should require a warrant. So if you think Section 215 or USA Freedom Act, they're at least getting kind of a rubber stamp behind-the-scenes secret court warrant, which is bad enough. But then, let's say they shut that down and they only start relying on 702 and they find a way to make everything incidental. Maybe they are. Maybe they're not. I don't know. But it sure is possible. And they sure have lied to us or kept it hidden for a long time on a lot of programs, so I don't trust them. But under 702, we know that they don't even get the rubber stamp secret court warrant. They get a different kind, which is just approval of the process once a year. So if the process approves them and then they change definitions and then they have to get lambasted, maybe they'll unchange the definitions. But they could basically go an entire year by just internally changing their definition and then hoping for an approval later. I don't know. That might be the worst of the worst. Maybe they won't do it. Bolden, no way. That's way too conspiratorial. Right? That's what I'm sure some people will say. Now, 702 is a big problem, and I don't even think that is the main part of the problem yet either. And my friend Shahid Buttar, who used to run the Bill of Rights Defense Committee that we worked with very closely to oppose the National Defense Authorization Act indefinite detention from 2012 of Barack Obama that still exists today, and unfortunately a lot of people just don't even pay attention to it anymore. He now works with the EFF up in San Francisco. Here's what he tweeted the other day. I replied. Of course. The comments here reveal a broader suspicion. This is, again, according to the New York Times report. He saw the same thing that I was seeing. The comments here reveal a broader suspicion that I share as a legal realist. And mind you, Shahid is a lawyer by training, so he understands the term of law far better than I do. He said, the reported end of Section 215 surveillance is a red herring, obviated by NSA, FBI, DEA's use of other formal legal authorities, 12333, to expand its previous capabilities. And he put a question mark after 12333 because we don't know. They've never told us, and we only have to guess. We've got some whistleblowers who've talked about this as well. And Marcy Wheeler makes this point as well at emptywheel.net. And this was in her report, which was a day before the New York Times came out. She was listening. She probably listens to all these podcasts, all the lawfare garbage, reads all of the documents that are released, listens to all the hearings. She covers all of it. And she said the day earlier, so this was on Monday or Sunday. I don't know when she released this. Okay, so Monday morning, I guess, hours earlier. She says, one other thing, though. The NSA almost never gives up a function they like. Instead, they make sure they don't have any adverse court rulings telling them they've broken the law and move the function to someplace else. So if they're concerned about their approach on the USA Freedom Act or getting some restrictions, it's whack-a-mole. We're not supposed to do this, or it's not as easy. Let's figure out a different way to do it under a different authority. And she goes on. She says, given that the government withdrew several applications last year after FISC, F-I-S-C, threatened to appoint an amicus, and given that the government has now brought in 12333 sharing, that's what Obama did on his way out, handing President Trump the ability to share information collected under other authorities through 12333, they may have just moved something legally problematic to someplace else. In any case, there's no follow-up on the podcast, which might at least clarify the obvious parts of this revelation, to say nothing of asking for the underlying detail. So we don't really know what's going on. We know that they specifically, at least according to this person, if they're to be believed, that they stopped using the USA Freedom Act 6 months ago, and that the Trump administration might not want to renew it. It would be good if the Trump administration doesn't renew it. But if they're just doing that, like Mr. Clark said a few years ago, just to keep focus on Section 215 instead of the real problem, which is 215 being just a fraction of the surveillance, then, of course, it's disinfo or misinformation. So let's talk briefly about 12333. And I know this episode is going a little bit long, so of course, I'm very grateful for you spending some time. If you need to listen to it in sections, this is a section that you'd want to switch out. This is from EPIC, which is the Electronic Privacy Information Center, Executive Order 12333. It was signed by President Ronald Reagan on December 4th, 1981. It established broad new surveillance authorities for the intelligence community outside the scope of public law. Section 215 and Section 702 both have some level of restriction. I mean, not much, but there are certain logistical difficulties that the NSA finds in using each. And that's what I think Marcy Wheeler is getting the point of. They don't like losing in court. So if they think that there's any place where they're going to get in trouble or have a public outcry against them, they'll just fill us with propaganda saying, oh, well, we're done with this program. And now, mind you, back in 2015, we were told that Section 215 was done. The mass bulk collection of phone records under Section 215 was over. You could do Google searches on this and you will find a number of reports from mainstream and alternative sources talking about how it's done. It was going to change the USA Freedom Act. Now, at the time, they were collecting billions of records a day. What they did with the USA Freedom Act then was, instead of them collecting or sweeping them up, now I'm using our meaning for the term collecting, they basically required the data companies, Facebook, Verizon, AT&T, Google, they required them to basically store it themselves, and then the NSA could collect it from them. So if we understand that whole definition of it, all the information under our definition of collect is still being scooped up. It's just being held by their corporate partners. Now, the NSA's definition of collect means when they've accessed it for further processing. And it used to be billions of records per day was being swooped up. We don't know how many they were accessing for further processing. At least from my research, we do know that the number that they were accessing for processing went down to like 150 million over a year in 2017, and I believe, or maybe it was 2016, and then 2017, or 2017 and 2018. But over the last couple of years, it was down to 160, and then it tripled, I think, in 2017 under Trump to like 500 million. But mind you, all the information is still being stored. It's just when they want to access it counts as when they're collecting it. So again, like inflation statistics from the government, it's all very much misdirection to make us think that they've reduced the problem that we're facing. Now, I don't know why I've kind of gone out on that. Oh, well, so there are some restrictions on this, but EO 12333 has virtually none. Outside the scope of public law is what EPIC has to say. EO often serves as an alternate basis of authority for surveillance activities above and beyond Section 215 and 702. And EPIC then links to Bruce Schneier on this. Be careful again when someone from the intelligence community uses the caveat, not under this program. So that'll give you some links, and there's some news that's associated with it as well in that link. And of course, again, all of our archives, 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. The next piece that I'm coming on to is that there is speculation. There was a guy named Mr. Tai who actually was concerned about how much this was a technology official with the State Department, who is now, I guess, a form of a whistleblower. And they're speculating that the government relies directly on 12333 as opposed to its statutory authority to conduct surveillance inside the United States. It's only speculation, of course. I mean, my gut instinct tells me that's exactly what they're doing. And again, that link is there in the show notes as well. I've only highlighted one section of it. But here from Cyrus Farivar, who's a guy who hates me, thinks I'm a neo-Confederate, has never reported positively. He does a lot of technology reporting, a lot of stuff anti-NSA surveillance, really good reporting. But whenever it associates with the 10th Amendment Center, of course, we're neo-Confederate racists who like nullification and Calhoun and Jefferson Davis and slavery and all that stuff. So it's really unfortunate because I feel like, at least on this issue, we would connect very closely. But it just shows how people are partisan hacks. But this is a very good report from 2014. And they're talking about John Ty. He says 12333 is used to target foreigners abroad, and collection happens outside the U.S. However, he says, my complaint is not that they're using it to target Americans. My complaint is that the volume of incidental collection on U.S. persons is unconstitutional. I don't know why it would have to be a certain level. Again, they use that same type of government people use the same type of argument that, if it's just a limited airstrike on another country, it doesn't count as war. So therefore we don't have to declare war. Now, this is the same kind of argument. And again, I think it's disinfo or a misdirection. So you only are concerned with the volume, but they shouldn't be collecting this information without a warrant in the first place. Now, it's not just this guy. William Binney, who, if you follow, this was the guy who was the NSA's technical director for many years. He's actually in the Oliver Stone film on Snowden, which I thought was very, very good. It's a dramatic kind of presentation of that story, but for those of you who watched it closely, it does follow the timeline pretty closely. And there's some kind of behind the scenes, like the JFK, some guesswork and of things that Stone does, but he's actually relying on advice and input from real whistleblowers. So William Binney is one of these guys. He's the former technical director of the NSA. He's a whistleblower, and he actually had a role in that film. Well, not him personally, but they portrayed him without, I think, specifically naming him. And he said, he was a 30-year NSA veteran. He told ARS that drastic measures such as the NSA's Fairview program, described by other intelligence whistleblowers as the NSA's project to own the internet, are also authorized under EO 12333. And this is what Binney says. The program was started at least back in 2001 and has expanded to between 80 and 100 tap points on the fiber optic lines in the lower 48 states. Most of these fiber optic points are not on the east or west coast. This means that the primary target of this collection is domestic. Most collection of U.S. domestic communications and data is done under EO 12333, Section 2.3, Paragraph C, in the upstream program. It has its own upstream program, and this gives you, so if you look at this link, you can read it yourself. So Binney is telling us that 12333 is the primary legal justification. Clark told us that Section 215 is only a small piece of it. So these are insiders with knowledge. They know how the whole system works. So they're not the only ones, though. Keith Alexander, man should be behind bars. Former NSA director. This is also from McClatchy. I'm not sure if they're even in business anymore. I don't really see them come up too often. But this is a report from a few years ago, back in 2013, a few months after the original Snowden leaks. And they're briefly touching on 12333. They're not talking about it in detail, and I haven't seen a lot of reporting on it, but it's starting to pick up. But they said back then, the impact of 12333 is enormous and largely unknown. Documents leaked by former NSA contractor Edward Snowden suggest that less than half of the metadata the NSA has collected has been acquired under the provisions of the USA PATRIOT Act, that's Section 215, and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that's Section 702, the two laws that have received the most attention for permitting NSA programs. And here's the juicy part. General Keith Alexander, the NSA director, has ratified that impression, saying that the majority of NSA data is collected, quote, solely pursuant to the authorities provided by Executive Order 12333. They're basically using it. That's their main authority. So when they say, again, that the term of art, we're not using this program, they could totally shut it down. but they're collecting the information. And there was so much, once these types of things started coming up, I was reading one of the documents a while back where they actually had to start tagging things because they're concerned about how they access this versus that and how it might come in a court case, and they want to make sure that they look good. So they start tagging 215, 702, 12333, and so then they can sort and filter. Now, what's even more interesting, and I'm not really going to cover this here because I think it's really kind of over my head, but Marcy Wheeler talks about federated queries. And in this article, it's EO 12333 FISC workaround. So what they're basically doing is if they use Section 215 or 702 and they want to target someone specifically, then they're actually collecting that information and analyzing it, collecting in their version of it. Then EO 12333 is then used to share the information with other law enforcement agencies, with Five Eyes, with other countries, with corporate partners, and it just gets passed all around. And Obama, at the end of his term, one of the last things he did in office was to expand the ability to share. So it's really just how they work together. They're collecting all the information at the same time. Sometimes there's no overlap, but a lot of times there is. And they're using each piece of that puzzle in ways to be able to share it or how they access it, etc. That one's a really good read, and I probably can't distill it down, so I'm not going to cover it in too much detail other than just mentioning it. This one other piece over at The Intercept talks about how 12333 is used. The Defense Intelligence Agency permits the collection on U.S. persons, a category which includes not just human American citizens, but also American companies, lawful permanent residents of the U.S., and more, so long as the information collected falls into one of 16 broad categories. Now, mind you, again, they're using the term collect to mean sweep up and then analyze further. They're not even talking about our version of collecting. So one of the 16 categories is commercial relations, commercial organizations believed to have some relationship with foreign organization or persons. Basically everybody. Potential sources of assistance to intelligence agent activities. Potential sources of assistance. And they can analyze it according to the DIA. That's their document on how they do it. And you can find all the links in here. You're just going to have to go through and click through. And we're getting close to the end here. I do want to point out that they use incidental as a term of art again on 12333. And there is a legal loophole which then makes them, gives them the ability to make everything basically foreign internet traffic and foreign communications. So in June of what year? I'm not sure. But at the end of June, according to this report at CSO, researchers published a paper warning about legal loopholes for surveillance that could be exploited by the government in order to collect Americans' communication in bulk without a warrant. Executive Order 12333 was one of the most troubling legal loopholes that the researcher says deserves more attention. Basically, what they can do is something called shaping. They can manipulate the traffic and reroute it to a foreign location, and then therefore they can collect it under either 702 or 12333 without any type of warrant, without any 12333 without any restriction whatsoever, because they're not even reporting for a yearly rubber stamp of their approach under 12333. They call it shaping, and this is how they say it in the report. The government could exploit Executive Order 12333 by deliberately manipulating Americans' network traffic so that it is routed through a device located abroad. All of a sudden, it's foreign traffic. If the data is located overseas, then it could belong to a non-American citizen and therefore can be collected in bulk, such as, quote, all internet traffic, including metadata and full content sent between a pair of networks. All of it. Tai also warned that when the NSA incidentally collects Americans' communications overseas, the incidental collection is a legal loophole that can be stretched very wide. So they can use shaping, and they have done this. For example, they can, if it's hard to collect information in Yemen for whatever, they're tapping in through 702, I believe, to the backbone. They can just reroute everything to a friendly jurisdiction, and then they can just dump it all, take it, analyze it however they want, and send it back. And you don't even know that this is happening. So That is really, really a big deal. The Century Foundation, tcf.org, talks about this briefly as well. In fact, the agency has the technical methods that can be used to deliberately reroute internet communication. Since it's hard to intercept Yemen's international communications from inside Yemen itself, the agency might try to, quote, shape the traffic so that it passes through communications cables located on friendlier territory. The NSA, they write, has clandestine means of diverting portions of the river of internet traffic that travels on global communications cables. Do they even need to do that? I don't know. But if they have to, then there's no restriction. It doesn't matter if 215 is shut down. Now, just as an example here, I pulled up G Suite Tools, which is just a handy trace route. It tells you all the different hops. If you go to a website, all the hops and where it goes. I'm going to assume, and I've done this already, but I'm going to assume, doing it live with you here, that if I go to 10thamendmentcenter.com, it's going to first go overseas to either Germany or the United Kingdom. And that means my traffic is now foreign traffic. So let's just take a look. I'm going to type in 10thamendmentcenter.com, click trace. Let's see what happens. Yeah, immediately. I mean, I have to zoom in, but it looks like the first place it goes is London. So as soon as I type in that information, it's going over the cables and immediately through the internet backbone to London. Hop number 2 is in London. Hop number 3 looks like it's here in Los Angeles. Nope, San Francisco. That's probably where WEP Engine is based. That's my host, WP Engine. So that's automatically international web traffic. They don't even have to use Section 702. They don't have to worry about Section 215. And if the same thing happens if I make a Skype call or a phone call, I don't know how to do a trace route on my own phone calls, but basically everything that we're doing is bouncing all over the world. And I think that is the great concern. So I hope this is a little overwhelming sometimes when I look into it, and I haven't done it in a little while. So hopefully this is all making sense. Hopefully this is clear. It's interesting. It's educational. You're finding tools that you can use to understand this better. I don't know. It's a lot to digest. If you want to go through the show links, again, here on YouTube and over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty, there is a ton of stuff. And each of the links has a ton of stuff with links to other documents and things like that. If you want to get up to speed on it, this is a good introductory show. And we're now on almost 50 minutes. So this is probably my longest episode ever. I apologize, but I also appreciate you spending some time with me on this. But again, there's a lot to learn, and I think this is a good starting point to understand what's going on, that we shouldn't believe them when we're hearing that a program is being shut down. We shouldn't believe that they're actually stopping their surveillance. In fact, I think in many ways it's likely that it's getting worse. So thank you so much for spending time with me today. If you've enjoyed this, you found it interesting or educational, fun to watch, whatever it may be, irritating, please smash that like button. Share, continue to leave comments, send an email, whatever it may be. I'm very grateful for you spending some time with me. We'll be back on Friday, and of course, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time here at Good Morning Liberty. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Have a great day.